Howdy, y'all. My name is Price, and welcome back to some more Slime Rancher 2. All right, y'all. It is October the 18th. How you doing? Welcome to another morning, evening, afternoon, some time of the day of Slime Rancher for y'all. We're still working on coming up with ideas for Largos, so if you have any ideas for Largos you'd like to see me bring into the game, leave them down in the comments below. I'm going to start putting them in next episode, because at this point y'all have had some time to put down some comments, so then we'll start getting some new ones. So this is your last chance to have a say on the next set of Largos, but then again, we're going to do more sets over the time, so it's not really going to be big of a deal. But for this set, let's get those in. So today, I think we're going to need to go and get... I'm going to be drinking my coffee while I'm talking to y'all here. We're going to need to be going to get resources so that we can buy or make more snares, more decorations, everything. So if we just look really quickly, I think the big thing are jellystone and primordial oil and stuff. Yeah, primordial, buzzwax, jellystone. So we will go and look for that stuff. Are there still plorts in these, or was I able to clear out all the plorts? All right, whenever I come back and deal with these plorts, all of these are just going to go straight into the refinery. I don't need money off of those. Again, we're at 108 new bucks, or 108,000, not just 108 new bucks, so I feel like we're fine in that department. I'm going to go take this Moondew Nectar, and there's actually probably some space in the silo out here I can use. And we can see what kind of a mess is going on over here with these ringtail slimes. Oh, boy. Yeah. Yeah, there's still a mess of these gosh darn hands. Like, it's actually comical that they will never die. Oh, look! Jellystone. So we saw the place where we had deep brine on here, and now we have a jellystone spot? Well, isn't that my little special day? Gosh, there's so many of these guys, and they're just not even denting it. All right, cool. So here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. So I can eventually try and get that flutter Gordo. You come with me. You come with me. I'm gonna let the sea hen and the roostro hang out. We're gonna go ahead and say goodbye to the final of the pink bunnies. Y'all been giving me some great names for these ones. The Largo name list is up. We're going to start doing the polls soon. So if y'all haven't seen it yet, there's a community post. On the first one, you can go and you can comment and leave your ideas for names for each of the Largos. Then what's going to happen is I'm going to go through and I'm going to pick my top, however many YouTube will let me put in a poll. So I think it's like 5 or 6, maybe 7. I'm not sure. So I'll put my top ones in there, and then in the following days, I'll have a poll for each Gordo, and y'all can vote on what you think is the best name for that Gordo. Do go do that down below, please. It would be wonderful, I say down below, on my community post. I will do my best to put that in a link in the description, but you could also just go to my Stumpt price page, and it'll be there on the community post. I don't know why I'm grabbing all this food. I kind of need to just be incinerating it at this point. But it's fine. We're just gonna fill this sucker up. Okay. So yeah, y'all have been leaving me great ideas down there. Also, do be sure, leave me ideas down below for what you would like to see next, or hear from me next, rather, while we're playing some of these morning Slime Ranchers, because we're going to have a lot of time where it's mostly me just walking around, gathering resources, doing all this stuff, as it has been now for a couple episodes. We're going to fall into a little bit of a pattern, sort of a consistency, we'll say, for a little while. While we're still growing, but we will have a little more consistency. So yeah, buckle up, I guess, and this is what we're going to be doing going forward. So if you have any ideas of what you would like to hear me talk about, riff on, I'm cool with it. Otherwise, I can talk about nothing forever, let me tell you. So let's go ahead and let's get out into the Rainbow Island out here. Let's look for some jellystone, because we definitely need some of that. Let's pick these guys back up, right? I can pick these guys back up, right? Yes. So we'll pick these ones up. I can make these do some fun things somewhere else, I think. Or at least just play around from time to time. Okay. So we're looking for all of our basic resources, right? I mean, not just... Oh, by the way, I threw that sea hen and that roostro in there just to see, like, what'll happen. Not any particular reason other than I was like, oh, that could be funny. Hey, man, I'll help you out. He's doing that thing where he's kind of stuck. I feel like that happens sometimes to them first thing in the morning. The hens and the roostros, they struggle. Okay. So we're going to fly around looking for our normal stuff. So one of y'all mentioned, I not too long ago in some of these episodes, we talked about dreams and nightmares and all kinds of stuff. And one that I didn't bring up, but one that actually afflicts me, or has in the past, I've gotten... it's been a while since it's hit me. But in the same vein, that is related to those things, of sleep paralysis. Some of y'all may know what this is. Some of y'all may not know what this is. But it is something that affects quite a lot of people. And so what... I think it's best to describe it this way because I think it really kind of connects to people because everybody knows what sleepwalking is. Oh, give me a second. Okay, sorry about that. So, everybody knows what sleepwalking is, right? It's where you your body sort of wakes up and acts out your dreams while you're still asleep. Right? So someone will be walking around and doing all kinds of things because they are sort of barely awake, half awake, subconsciously awake, acting out what's happening in their dreams. Okay? So you can think of it as just like you're asleep, but your body's awake. Sleep paralysis is the opposite. It's when you're sort of coming out of a dream state and your head, your brain, wakes up before the rest of your body. And they call it sleep paralysis because you actually, when you are sleeping, your body secretes a hormone or chemical. I'm not exactly sure what it is. But there is a chemical of some sort that your body secretes somewhere that essentially keeps you from acting out your dreams. It's basically as you fall asleep, it sort of kicks in, and that's what keeps your body relatively still while you're asleep. Oh, I love these tabby bunnies. I feel like I've rarely seen them out here, but just seeing them in that light, I love it. It's like almost like Totoro, but like a little bit different. So anyway, so yeah, sleep paralysis. You have this chemical in your body that sort of keeps you from acting out your dreams. And when you wake up, but that doesn't, you're essentially paralyzed. You cannot move. Trust me. It's a very terrifying experience. And it actually comes along with a whole bunch of other things as well. But first, I'll just explain the physical experience. And again, I have had this since childhood. I'm lucky right now because now thinking about it, I have not experienced it in quite a while. I'm going to attribute that to better sleeping habits, and probably mostly the therapy and the psychiatry, to be honest. Because a lot of times nightmares or sleep disorders like that are associated with mental health issues, right? Like it makes it worse, right? So physically what happens is because your body can't move or it feels like it's not moving, it's also because you can't feel it, so you don't get the feedback. All right. So one of the things that happens when you are experiencing sleep paralysis is that you feel like you can't breathe, right? It feels very hard to breathe. It's scarily so, right? Like you're sitting there and you're struggling and you're just like, please help me breathe, right? It's because you can't feel your chest and your lungs moving. Right? Normally when you breathe, you're actually getting some feedback from your body that it's working, that your chest is inflating and deflating is a big part of breathing often. Some people have trained themselves to breathe like into their stomach instead of into their chest most of the time, but still, same deal. You're not going to be feeling what you're expecting to feel. And so your brain interprets that as, I'm not breathing, right? Because that's what it feels like. And because you're in this semi-awake, semi-asleep state, your experience then is somewhat dreamlike. So you have this combination, excuse me, this combination of slowly waking up, but still in a dream state, but your body not moving, and you can feel that it's not feeling, right? And like, think about that for a second. Like you don't feel it, or the way your brain interprets it is you can feel that it's not moving, right? Like that's how your brain interprets it. It doesn't interpret it as, oh, I can't feel this. I hope that distinction makes sense. To me, it's a very important distinction in linguistics. So anyway, you can't feel your chest and whatnot moving, so you interpret that as not being able to breathe. You're still in a dream state, so what your brain does is it tries to put something there to tell your brain what's going on, right? It's like, oh, here's the answer to that problem. And so, like I said, because you're in this dream state, this semi-awake, semi-dream state, oftentimes what happens, and I can vouch for this, it's happened to me numerous times, is that you sort of hallucinate something causing that. You hallucinate something that is either pressing down on your chest. That's a common one. There's you can see maybe figures in a doorway who are watching over you. Dark figures or something that's often spoken about. Oftentimes people have very specific versions of those dark figures, but they all seem to align with the same kinds of features. It seems like it's very heavily inspired by, your own fears that you have. And it's a really terrifying experience. I mean, I'll just say that every time it's a terrifying experience. Not to get too morbid, all right? Not to get too morbid, but there's a certain level of every time it happens to you kind of accepting that this may be the end. You know what I mean? Like it's a terrifying thought, right? But that's how it feels, right? That's how it feels. It's awful. Whenever I eventually awake from it, it's usually like a pretty terrifying thing. I'm like, oh gosh, okay, I'm okay. That was awful. If you have a partner, sometimes they can help you out of it because, there's a certain level of, you can maybe make a little bit of noise or maybe move a hand or something. Like you can try really hard and have a little bit of an impact outside of your body. So, sometimes Chrissy will wake me up. Like the last several times it's happened, I sort of try my best to like ask for her, to try and like say her name or something like that. And then she can like shake me awake. Right. It's no fun. It's really no fun, but it's something I've dealt with my whole life. A lot of people have dealt with it their whole lives. I have always interpreted it. This is not necessarily an interpretation that the medical community has. Okay, so don't draw this as a direct comparison. But I've always thought that speaking of it as basically like reverse sleepwalking is kind of the most easy way to understand it. Again, from a scientific chemical standpoint, there's a lot more complex stuff that goes into those things, but just as a general descriptive rule, that's kind of what it's like. But what's interesting, so let's bring this around to some history, some art history. So the word nightmare, all right? Nightmare. What does that mean? Where does it come from? Well, a mare, like a stallion, like a horse, right? A mare is I guess that's a lady horse, right? A mare, and then night. It comes at night, so it's the horse that comes at night, right? But really, it's more like an interpretation of like the devil riding your back is sort of a way of kind of interpreting that. And so it's because this experience that happened to people back in, I don't want to say ancient times, just back in earlier times in our history. This was explained as if like maybe a curse was placed upon you, and so a demon was sent to you in the middle of the night. You're damned in some way, essentially. And so then like literally a demon will come to you, or like, yes, the nightmare will ride your, the devil will ride your back. And so you'll see these paintings. There's actually a very famous painting called The Nightmare. And in it, you see a person laying down with a little like demon on their chest, and then you can see a horse in the background kind of looking at it. And that's sort of where that comes from, is that idea of a thing coming to you in the middle of the night and sitting itself upon you. So the origin of the word nightmare actually comes from the experience of sleep paralysis. But, you know, it also shares a lot of characteristics with non-sleep paralysis nightmares, right? There's a lot of anxiety involved. Your mental health state is heavily informing it. You basically just have to sort of be susceptible to it happening, from what I understand. Some people are susceptible to it, others aren't. I'm a pretty light sleeper, so I wonder if that might have a thing to do with it. I'm not sure if that's a thing. Again, this is just me kind of riffing on it. The medical and scientific extent of my knowledge on this is what I know about dreams, and then my specific physical, my own experience, but also I do understand the concept of the chemical paralysis that occurs and those interpretations. It's something that's always fascinated me to try and understand, because I didn't actually realize it was a thing until college. I didn't think it was... I did not fully understand that the experiences that I was having were actually, sorry, I'm adjusting my chair, that the experiences that I was having were semi-awake. I interpreted them as just being asleep, because often what happens in your sleep paralysis is like you wake up halfway through this, you're super confused and feel horrible and everything like that, and then you kind of slowly fall back asleep and then immediately wake up. Does that make sense? You kind of like your eyes closed, you kind of go back to sleep, and then boom, you're up. So for me, I always thought, oh, it's a nightmare, and then I woke up. But what's interesting is I've never really been superstitious. I've never really been afraid of demons or anything like that. And I think a big part of that comes from I watched a ton of horror movies as a kid. So things that were demonic or scary or anything like that, I'm not going to say I wasn't scared, but in terms of how scared I was, it sort of was to the same extent as you would be afraid of anything that you see on TV. And so my nightmares were rarely associated with, or my sleep paralysis was rarely associated with like things like that. I never really saw, oh, there's a demon, or oh, there's this. Sometimes I would get the whole, there's someone standing in the doorway or something like that. I never interpreted it as anything other than, oh my gosh, that could be a person. But what I did used to experience, and this is so interesting looking back on it, I used to sleep under a big, I guess like nowadays we call it a duvet. Back then we just called it a feather bed. I don't know if that's anything that it's ever been called before. My family calls things weird things, so I always have to like stop and be like, is that what it's called? Do y'all know what I'm talking about? So if y'all know what a feather bed is, I used to sleep with one of those, and I'm the kind of person who I like to kind of like burrow myself into things while I'm sleeping, right? I want to be like covered in stuff. So sometimes I would sleep underneath that as a kid. And when I would have my sleep paralysis, I would interpret it as that thing was resting too heavy on me. And it was not heavy, right? It was never a heavy thing that I would not be able to push off of myself. But I would have this experience that it was on top of me and too heavy and that I couldn't breathe. And then I would wake up, right? And then I would wake up, and this was, I would have those experiences even after that thing was gone. Even after I wasn't using that anymore, I would still have that experience of, oh, this thing is on top of me and I can't breathe. So I always thought that, okay, that's weird that I'm having nightmares about my old feather bed. But what it probably was, what it turns out, is like, oh, I had those early negative experiences with my sleep paralysis and associated those with this feather bed being on top of me because that's what my brain did to try and figure out what it is that made me feel this way. So it just kept on saying, well, when I feel this way, it must be that I'm going through this again, so it must be that that thing is on top of me again. Does that make sense? Your brain is filling in the gaps to try and figure out what's going on because it knows that what's going on is not right, it's not normal, and it knows that it can't just happen all of a sudden that that's how you feel. The way you feel means there's something there. Okay? So it's like your brain has these interpretations that are wrong, right? They're just wrong, but it's all in an effort to protect you, right? Because if you're wrong, right? If you're if you experience that and you don't wake up, or if you're not afraid or whatever like that, if you're having that feeling of not breathing and you don't properly respond to it, well, that's a pretty fatal decision, huh? Or a pretty fatal situation. So it's better that your brain errs on scaring you awake and interpreting it in a dangerous way because of how it feels, rather than telling you exactly what you see, right? It doesn't give you a straight line to your perception. And again, this is not something that's happening in the moment. This is all the time. Your brain is making these kinds of decisions for you. So that's how that came about. And I bring this up because one of y'all mentioned it as well. And I can't believe I didn't bring it up, because it is one of my favorite things to speak about in terms of dreams and whatnot, because of my experience. My learning that sleep paralysis was a thing. So that was my entire life, basically, as far back as I can remember. I know it happened when I was like in first grade. I can think back to that far, and I'm sure it happened before then. So I think it's just like, it's part of my nature in a way, or like just my temperament, I guess. But also it influenced by anxiety. And I've been an incredibly anxious individual my entire life. Again, the genetics of mental health are real. But then also the environmental effects. It's actually, it's so interesting because in my life I can see both sides. I can see the things that reinforce my anxiety, and I can also see the genetic component because it's in like all of my family. Like, not just learned in all of my family, but like experienced and clearly a part of our genetics. So I had these experiences, went all the way up through into college. And when I got to college, I took a neuroscience class. So this would have been probably my sophomore year. So for those of y'all who don't know what that is, that's probably around, I was probably 20. Somewhere around 20. And I took this neuroscience class. I loved neuroscience. Neuroscience was my favorite subject. I kind of wanted to go into neuroscience for a while. And then as I looked more and more into it, it seemed like the field was far more medical and far less cognitive, if that makes sense. So it was way more about like diagnosis rather than trying to understand. And I've always wanted to understand. I'm someone who wants to know how things work. So that's why I kind of fell out of that. That's why I fell into things like evolutionary psychology, developmental psychology, because these things fall more in line with trying to physically understand, but like also analyze your emotions and everything else as to how you feel and how that like actual experience is. Neuroscience as a whole and neuropsychology does frequently downplay those things in order to put an emphasis on the physical nature of your mental health, which is valid. There's the whole chemical component. You cannot separate the fact that your experience is also we'll say it's, okay, I'm going to use a word here that a lot of y'all might not know just because it's it's an interesting word. But your consciousness is reified, is what the term would be. And what that means is you can't point to any one part of your brain and say that's you, that's your self, that's your cognition, or that's your experience right now. Never. You can't just point to one place. Instead, your consciousness and your feeling and everything like that is a combination. So any one piece is not, it's nothing, right? It's just a piece. But the combination of all of those things are reified into your consciousness. Like your consciousness only exists as all of those things together. And then anything that your experience is will always be reified in that way. Another term that is used for that is a gestalt. So a gestalt is referring to like the sum, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts kind of a situation. So it's all of the pieces together that make your consciousness a whole. So all of that is to say that like the chemical component is incredibly important, and it explains the origins of so much of your feelings, and that is absolutely tantamount to understanding psychology. However, I don't think it is it's necessary but not sufficient is the way that we would say it. So you need to study it in order to understand someone's experience and their psychological well-being. Okay, you need to, in my opinion. You can't ignore the chemical components of someone's experience without completely ignoring so much knowledge that we have and understanding of what's going on, right? If you have a chemical imbalance, then chemical responses are what you should use. If instead your experience is purely psychological, say a psychosomatic response to something, and psychosomatic, for those of y'all who don't know, that's a word that means your brain creating experience, right? So you can have a psychosomatic medical response where you think you have an illness, and so your body kind of gives you that illness, but it's not a chemical response in any way. You don't have something going on in your brain that makes that happen in terms of like, oh, I've got too much dopamine or not enough, or too much adrenaline or not enough, or whatever. Instead, it's a fully psychological thing. There is some behavioral component or psychological component that's making that happen. So it's important to study all aspects in order to understand people. I saw that island out there with the... That's right. There's that one little island with that one little bit, but we'll go ahead and get it. Neuroscience, super fascinating, absolutely necessary to study, but not sufficient for understanding everything. Okay. So all that's to say, excuse me, that your consciousness is more... Oh gosh, I'm coughing. Hold on a second. Made myself laugh. Your consciousness is greater, is something more than just your chemical experience. Because like ignoring that also is never sufficient, right? You can just look at the evidence of how people's well-being. Oh gosh, how am I going to get back up here? You can look at the evidence of people's psychological growth and well-being in psychiatry, therapy, etc. The best psychiatrists and the most successful ones also suggest that you go to therapy, and they will also communicate to you about your psychological experience. I have a great psychiatrist, and we start out our sessions with him asking, like, how are you doing? What's going on? You know, how are you feeling? You know, what is my subjective experience? Like, we don't even talk about our medications until he's got a full rundown of how I'm feeling, what's going on. If I have any questions or concerns, or if I'm kind of like going through something, he'll talk to me about it. So having that kind of a psychiatrist not only builds trust, but it also means he's got a much more complete view of how I'm doing, so he can treat me a lot better. When we first started seeing each other, I thought that I needed to treat my my mental illness probably with just ADHD medication. I thought, okay, we're gonna get some something like a Vyvanse or something like that, because that's what my brothers are on, or whatever. That's probably gonna help because, like I said, my brothers are on it, so it means that it works for us genetically. Oh goodness, my voice today. I'm gonna go get some water here in a second. But what I mean by that genetically is that, like, if it seems to work for, you know, two of your brothers and your dad, there's a good chance that the same stuff will work for you because of how much genetics you share with those people. It's not a guarantee, but it's like one of those ones where, like, that's kind of where a doctor would start. But instead, we treated a whole bunch of other stuff, and that helped way more than I could have imagined. And that's why it took so long for me to be like, okay, I do think I need to look at the ADHD stuff, though, because mentally and emotionally, I was in so much better situation. So doing so much better that we were like, maybe I don't need it. And we went without it for a while to make sure. I think I've been being treated now for like 9 months, almost a year maybe. And so that's how we knew, right? We took our time. We figured it out. And I was very fortunate to get a good psychiatrist there. Okay, I'm going to go get some water because I think I've been drinking too much coffee and not enough water. So I will be right back for y'all. It'll be an instant. Okay, much better. All right, where were we? We were talking about neuropsychology. We were talking about sleep paralysis. I'm not exactly sure what I was circling around to, but I know I was talking about how consciousness is like a reified concept, and how it's important to study both aspects of your psychology, but also your neurochemical makeup. All of these things are important to understanding exactly what you're going through and how you are. Okay, so sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis. What was I going to say about sleep paralysis? Okay, I could talk about how... So my experience, like I've said, I haven't experienced it in a while. And I was experiencing it every single night for like probably a year and a half. Basically right after the pandemic started, and before I started my treatment for my anxiety. And I think it was just that so many things kept happening that ramped my anxiety way up, and it was like every day there was another new crisis. And it's not like we're out of that. We're basically still experiencing that right now, right? But I am better able to handle it emotionally, I think. So I haven't had those problems. But I also dream less, which is unfortunate because, like I said, dreaming is important for organizing your thoughts. I think it happens more often when I'm doing a lot of things, so it sort of forces my brain to work with it. But if I'm kind of having a routine, normal day, then it just doesn't clock, I think. So, that's a downside. But the benefit to my health, I think, is probably better because I know that could not have been good for my heart, right? Going through that level of panic and anxiety frequently, you ain't supposed to experience an adrenaline spike like that every single day. That's trauma-inducing. So, the pluses and minuses. But no, basically, I lost some of that. Basically, I guess I wanted to point that out. Oh, and so yeah, I was gonna say, I think I was taking a neuroscience class. Here we're going on the journey. That's right. We're going on the journey of Price's experience. So I didn't learn about it until I realized what I had until it was mentioned in class once. And it was just kind of an offhand thing. And this is how I learned about it, like how it works, was in this class. And, I had this moment, I was like, oh, that's what it is. So I was talking to one of my colleagues afterwards, and I was like, oh yeah, I've had this thing since I was a kid, and I had no idea that it was a thing, but oh man, that explains a lot. And I was very nonchalant about it, right? Because, it's been my whole life. It was not something that I had really looked too much into. I just figured it was a thing. And so I, told this to one of my colleagues, and the look on their face was like, oh my gosh, that's so terrible. I can't believe it. I've heard that that's the worst thing in the world. And just they felt so bad. And to me in that moment, I was like, oh, it's that bad? Really? Huh. I didn't know. Because, pain and suffering are relative. And to me, I'd experienced it for so long that it was like, oh, it's normal. It's not really a big deal. Not to say it isn't a horrifying experience. It's just I'm much better at when I wake up being like, oh, all right, I'm okay. I don't have the long-lasting anxious panic that lingers. So it's just more of a thing. I wake up in the morning, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm exhausted. That's the worst. I hate that. So I told this to my colleague, and they were basically freaked out. And so that's when I realized how serious it was in terms of how much it affects me. And so that's when I became interested in it. And so everything I looked into then was, finding out about other people's experiences and, what that's like and everything. And I will say, one of the hardest things for me to do is to relate to other people who have sleep paralysis. And it's because I've found that everyone I've ever talked to about their experience of sleep paralysis, or every interview or anything I've ever looked at having to do with sleep paralysis, has been with individuals who are superstitious about it. And so their interpretations have less to do with the physical issues that lead to it and more their interpretations of what they're experiencing. And so it's difficult for me, like I say, to connect to that because our interpretations of what's going on are very different, right? I recognize for me, right, I'm not gonna downplay anyone else's experience, right? If they experience what they experienced, I'm not going to disagree with that or disprove that, all right? But from my understanding, and for me, I know that it is a chemical issue. It has to do with basically like, my genes and my anxiety working together to be like, you need to wake up fast. You need to wake up faster than your body can, all right? You need to always be awake, you anxious person, you. So that's why it's been hard for me to connect with people about that because, like I say, they usually have a more interpretation that it's like, a demon is visiting them at night, or aliens are coming to abduct them, or any number of things. I think there's like a thing called the Tall Man, which is like a pretty common, almost like Slender Man-ish character. Not the same, right? Not like in the woods coming for kids, all that kind of stuff, but more just like a tall figure who's menacing. And like a lot of people share that. Like I say, it's common to interpret that there's like a dark figure in the doorway, a sinister force. And sometimes people fully interpret them as like coming into the room and sitting on their chest or staring into their eyes or being on the ceiling or whatever, right? It's terrifying. These are terrifying experiences. And I could see how you could see it and believe it because you're experiencing it. It's just as terrifying. It's not fake how you feel in that moment. And so those differences in interpretations have just always made it difficult for me to speak to anyone who experiences sleep paralysis other than beyond like the extreme feeling of it, right? We can both be like, yeah, it's awful, right? That kind of anxiety sucks. So we can, is the word commiserate? I'm not sure. In my head, I want that to be the word, but I'm not positive. But, we can share in that experience. So yeah, it's a really interesting thing, sleep paralysis. And I mentioned it because one of y'all did bring it up in the comments, and I feel like it kind of rounds out, it kind of rounds out our discussion of dreams a little bit. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to discuss about dreams. Oh, there is. Lucid dreaming. I've talked about this in previous videos before. Let's talk about it because this is something that a lot of people are really interested in. Lucid dreaming is essentially being conscious, and by that I mean aware. You're aware that you are dreaming, and you're able to somewhat control or interact with your dreams on a you turn the dreams into something you can control. Like you can move through your dream and be aware of it rather than sort of a passenger on your dream, right? Usually when you're in a dream, because you don't realize you're dreaming, you're sort of a passenger along the pathway, right? Like things will change. Suddenly you're in a different place. Suddenly you're talking like it's like time has passed a million, minutes and you're somewhere else and all kinds of things, right? A million minutes is a lot. But you know what I mean, I think. And so, if you lucid dream, you can have an impact, right? You can be like, oh, I want to fly away, or oh, I want to pull out a lightsaber to fight this monster, or whatever. Anything you can think of. I want to jet out into space. I want to drive a race car. I want to do whatever. It's having control over your dreams. There are some people who I think don't believe it's a thing. They believe that it's just sometimes you have dreams where you think you're conscious, and your brain convinces you that the choices you're making are your choices. Some people believe that that's how it goes. I'm not so sure about that, only because it seems like you can kind of train yourself to do it, and when you wake up, you can sort of, you remember it in a different way. But maybe it is you're just more aware of your dreams. I think that you can probably do it. I think that if what you're experiencing in your dreams is a sort of semi-conscious thing and you're a heavy sleeper, I'll say, then I think you can kind of make that happen and stick around in there for a while. For me, every time I've lucid dreamed, I get about 5 seconds before I wake up. I think it's because I'm a light sleeper. So as soon as my brain is like, oh, I'm inside of a dream, it's like, oh, we're awake. And then boom, I'm awake. Which is too bad because I can't really get very far into my dreams. But there are some people who claim to be able to do it very well. There's some people who claim to be incredibly skilled and able to do it. I don't disagree with their experiences. I think that they probably do. And there's ways to train yourself to do it, is the thing. Or again, theoretically. You know, I don't want to sit here and act like 100% lucid dreams are a thing. Like I say, it's a controversial subject. Or at least it was when I was studying. It may be something that's more agreed upon now. I haven't actually looked into further studies of lucid dreaming. But when I was in college and I learned about lucid dreaming, it was in my neuroscience class, and I had some colleagues. I call them colleagues because I was actually a teaching assistant for a while in that class as well, but there were several teaching assistants, so that's why I often refer to them as colleagues. Even if I was a student and they were a TA above me, because I eventually became a TA and I worked with those individuals, I just call them my colleagues. So one of my colleagues was talking about training for lucid dreaming. And so there were a couple of different ways that they talked about it. One is to have a sort of lucid dreaming clock, in which case, like, there can be in your room or somewhere something that has a really bright, like, red light or something like that that's blinking or something, okay? When a light flashes, dark light, dark light, dark light, while you're asleep, your body can sense that. It's not your body, it is your eyes. It's just like, just because your eyes are closed doesn't mean that light can't affect them to a degree. You know this, right? Go outside in the sun and close your eyes. It still kind of hurts. Versus if you go into a dark space and close your eyes, right? It's a very different experience there. We're still looking for resources, y'all. We're still looking for resources. So there's apparently, you know, that's a strategy where it's like you train yourself, in real life, you train yourself. I want to say real life. When you're conscious throughout your day, you're training yourself to respond to that red light by either saying out loud or consciously being aware. You're like, I am awake. I am not dreaming. Something like that. Okay? And so that's to help you recognize your consciousness, right? And so if you have one of those clocks that has that red light, that's supposed to be a way for you to train that. That's not what I did. So I can't speak to the validity of that, but I know a lot of people use that technique to some degree. For me, I used what I would call the homunculus method, which is based on the idea that your brain's interpretation of what your body looks like from the inside, from your senses, is way different than what you think your body looks like by looking in a mirror. When you look in a mirror, that's a more accurate representation of what you look like moving through the world. No question. That's your physical form. But your brain, because of the amount of neurons, sensory neurons associated with different parts of your body, those areas are interpreted as bigger in your brain. So for example, you have far more nerve endings on the palm of your hand than you do on the back of your hand. You have far more neurons in the tip of your pointer finger than in your palm of your hand. They're all more tightly packed together. So, because of that, your brain interprets your fingers and your hands as massive, and they interpret, like, let's say, your back or your arms, which don't have that many sensory neurons comparatively, are very small. So, that experience informs your brain as to what your physical form looks like. And in your dreams, because you're not getting feedback from your body or from the world around you, that's not how you look, right? Because your eyes can interpret your body as how it exists in the world, or a better representation of how it exists in the world, right? Perception is, to an extent, influencing your reality at all times. Perception is your reality at all times, but specifically altering things frequently. But it's still more accurate than your brain's interpretation internally. So during the day, walking around, you have your normal proportions, right? You look at the back of your hand and it looks like a hand. It looks like your hand in particular. So the technique that I used was all throughout the day, basically at random moments. And to a degree, this is like building a compulsion. So recognize that if you're someone who is prone to having issues with compulsions. But you're essentially training a compulsive action in which you frequently... Whoa, that one fell through the earth, didn't it? Oh, no, there it is. In which throughout the day, you look at the back of your hand and you really pay attention to it. And you go like, okay, I'm not dreaming, because my hand looks normal, right? You're looking at your hand, and you're like, I'm not dreaming. When you look at your hand in a dream, and you're able to really think about it and really look at it, your hand is huge. It doesn't make sense. Your body looks weird to you in your dreams if you actually pay attention to it. When you're dreaming and you're not aware of it, it just seems normal, right? You're just like, that's your body, and you don't even look at it or question it. But once you train yourself to recognize what your hand looks like and you're really aware of it all the time, and you trained yourself to constantly look at the back of your hand, again, you're training a compulsion. This is not something that's necessarily the best thing to do. So be aware of that, because compulsions can cause all kinds of issues for people. So I just want to recognize that. For me, it worked, but it can be a little bit tricky for people. So be aware of that, and be aware of like how you do with those things. So if you've trained yourself to frequently look at the back of your hand, if you train yourself to be aware of what your hand looks like in your dream because you're so frequently doing that action where you look at your hand outside of the dream, inside the dream, of course, your body, or you as a person, you're going to want to act normally, right? Your brain's going to be like, I want to act like I normally do so that I can interpret these other things in context to my normal self. Then looking at the back of your hand and going, I am not dreaming, suddenly doesn't work, because when you look at your hand, you notice that it looks different. So then you can say, I am dreaming, right? And that little spark of consciousness, right, awareness, is what you need. Because once you've got that, it's like, oh, I'm dreaming. Knowledge that you are dreaming is kind of what breaks you out of the subconscious experience of dreaming, and your body kind of going on autopilot. Now, couple of potential downsides. So this is why I don't like fully suggest it. Let's just get... I love these guys. They're so cute. They're so cute. Just got to get all the screenshots. So I do need to figure out how to change that control for screenshots, and then I'll just do it with buttons. But for now, I'm going to keep pausing it. I know some of y'all don't like that. Like I said, eventually I'll get that screenshot button changed, and then I'll be able to do that for y'all. Oh yeah, there's more sneaking back here. I must have gotten rid of it at one point. Okay, couple of potential downsides. A, disrupting your sleep, right? For me, it wakes me up. I think because my body, is so... I'm such a light sleeper that I think as soon as I experience that, my body's like, oh, you're awake. Boom, let's wake up. So for me, anytime I've ever lucid dreamed, like I said, it seems like it's basically lasted 8 seconds, somewhere around there. And my experience is usually like, okay, I'm dreaming, and immediately I feel this fuzziness in my eyes. And so I think that that's me waking up. For me, doesn't work too well. But I have heard that other people are experts at it, and they can do it for what feels like hours on end. Your dreams are bizarre in how they interpret time, so you can experience like any amount of time within your dream. Excuse me. So people can become kind of experts and skilled in that. Let me drink some water. So those individuals, allegedly, I can't question their experience, are able to, earthquake, they're able to do that, allegedly every night, things like that. I say allegedly, they experience it every night. And talk about it as a really awesome experience. I will say, or from what I've read of studies on individuals with lucid dreaming, but again, from long ago, there may be new studies. I was in college, or I was in grad school like 7 years ago, 8 years ago, maybe. So there's new research on stuff, and I keep up with stuff, when I can, but not all the time. So take what I say here with a certain understanding that there could be new information on this, more complex studies. From my studies back in the day, there was a concern and some evidence to show that people who lucid dream frequently, or who experience lucid dreaming frequently, get poor, sleep from it. You don't necessarily fall into the same level of REM sleep, where, that's the part of sleep where you're dreaming, but it's also the part where, your brain is doing the most, reorganizing. It seems that lucid dreaming can potentially disrupt that, which is not something you want to be doing, because that's the same thing as not getting enough sleep. It's the same thing as kind of being stressed and having poor sleep. It's not something you want to do if you can avoid it. So I would say if it's something that you're going to try and do, certainly look into those aspects, because you don't want to make your sleep worse. You really don't. It's associated with a whole bunch of bad health outcomes. Not just mental health, but also physical health. You can, if you have a really poor sleep for extended periods of time, it can affect your heart. It can affect all kinds of things because of the anxiety it causes, and then the lack of restfulness doesn't allow your body to properly heal and repair. So the impact of things that happen on you, both psychological and physical during the day, it takes longer for them to heal. And so because it takes longer for them to heal, the impact is more severe. So something to look into if lucid dreaming is something that sounds interesting to you. Okay, let's go back up. Let's put these resources up there. Today it's been a resource gathering, talk about stuff day, hasn't it? Let's go get some primordial oil. I think, yeah, down here's lava dust, and then we'll go up over to a couple of the places where I know there's primordial oil. So yeah, that's my experience of lucid dreaming. That's what I understand about lucid dreaming. So that is another aspect of sleep and dreaming that is really interesting, right? There's a lot that goes into dreams. There's a lot that goes into the subconscious experience. As going back to some history of psychology. All of y'all have probably heard of Sigmund Freud, one of the most famous psychologists in history, if not the most famous. Probably, actually, now that I think about it, Sigmund Freud is probably the psychologist that most people know about. Now, Sigmund Freud had some wacky ideas, all right? Wacky ideas. All the stuff you've probably heard about Freud in terms of his beliefs on what drives human behavior have been pretty much debunked and are not taken seriously in the field of psychology. So his I think what's called psychosexual development is not seen as valid or anywhere near the truth. However, Freud was the one who came up with the concept of the subconscious. All right, before Freud, we believed that everything that you did was based on conscious action. So you decided to do those things that you did. You are fully aware of what you're doing at all times, and as a result, you should be held responsible for everything having to do with your psychology and how you treat people. Because psychology is the study of human beliefs, being, and behavior. So yeah, that's a big part of it. So it was the study of behavior. so that idea of the subconscious, that there can be things that go on in your brain underneath the surface that you don't even know about, that was massive for the field of psychology. Absolutely one of the most important discoveries of the 20th century. So because of that understanding of subconscious, that's how we've been able to kind of move forward. And so I like to say, because people know who Sigmund Freud is, he's like that big one. Y'all can't see me, I'm waving my arms around and stuff as I'm talking. Because he's someone that everybody knows, and they tend to know like the silly stuff, the stuff that's not believed anymore, and not necessarily the stuff that's actually relevant or valid, seen as valid in the field of psychology anymore. Okay, we're gonna make our way up to the top of that waterfall. So yeah, that's the subconscious, and the subconscious obviously allows us the concept of, oh, this is how things in our dream can work. This is how our body and our brain can do things without our real consciousness, right? As one of my, and so that, you know, that opens the door for things about like, oh, how do we understand our perception? How do we understand how we view the world, right? Sorry, looking around. So once you get to that, once you open that door, that our understanding of the world is influenced by things underneath the surface, you can get to the point where, so not only do you understand the mechanics of perception, because they actually started to understand that in more like the 19th century. Like, so that's the 1800s. That's such a silly thing, right? I mean, it makes sense, but it's silly. Back then, they discovered the concept of perception. Like, here's how your eye works. It's actually a whole collection of different little points of light that are coming together, rather than just like a holistic photograph of life. So that discovery actually had a lot of influence on people. We started to really think about things differently. And so that concept helped lead the way to the subconscious, right? So you find out like, oh, my interpretation of reality is different from my experience, or from actual reality, right? Other people experience things differently because our mechanics, our machinery, whatever you want to call it, work in a certain way that's different. And so this influenced like culture and whatnot. Art started to take a turn where it would start to do, it's called impressionism, right? Where you have this sort of style of art that's trying to mimic the way that we perceive, right? So I think the best example of this is like Monet, the concept of pointillism. So what Monet did, if you all know who Monet is, likely. If you don't, go look him up. One of the most famous painters of all time. Likely the most famous impressionist painter. I'm trying to think back to my times in art history. But he would make art that was more about like what it looked like from the perspective of his eye, He was just trying to look at the points of light. Where's the color? And to form color, not from pure color, right? You don't mix the paint together and put that color on the page. Instead, you create it like points of light that complement one another in order to create that experience. And what you end up getting is color that's more vivid than if you were to, those don't go in there. I don't know why I have these. Though, so it's more vivid in its coloration because it more mimics oh no, don't lose those. Because it mimics the way that your eye works, if that makes sense. So that was a big part of it. So knowing that, okay, my interpretation of the world is not necessarily an accurate representation of the world. Okay? So we started to figure out your brain is doing stuff without you. So then the concept of the subconscious, that you do thinking stuff, right? Not just physical understanding of the world, but thinking under the surface, right? Forming of information underneath the surface. Very important. Very important. breakthrough in psychology. Did I hear? Oh, that was probably resources that I heard. Okay, let's head back. If we see any more on the way, we'll grab it, but I think we're pretty much done here for today. So that whole thing, basically, it's like, okay, if you combine the concept of the subconscious with dreaming, lucid dreaming, perception, all of that stuff, what it comes together is, I told you about this concept of the Gestalt, right? That your consciousness is a collection of all of these things. And that's also how your perception works. Your perception, again, I'm doing it. Your perception of the world is, again, sorry about my voice today. Like I said, I kind of woke up a little late. Is a whole bunch of different pieces that get mixed together inside of your brain that give you your experience of the world. So we will maybe talk about that next time, because there's some really interesting stuff about your perception, the different ways that your senses work, and I love talking about the senses. It really is my my favorite subject in psychology is perception, and I was fortunate enough to get to teach it a few times. Anyway, y'all, wow, we went through some places today, talked more about dreams. Let me know down below in the comments if there's anything you would like to hear me talk about. I'm always up for some suggestions. And alongside that, y'all, if you could like the video, comment, subscribe if you're not already. As far as the comment of the day, maybe we'll say, oh gosh, how about... oh gosh, this is so hard for me to do. Comment of the day, how about the nightmare cometh? Why not? It's spooky. It's spooky, and it's the spooky month. And beyond that, if you could watch another one of my videos, that would be wonderful. It tells YouTube that you want to see more stuff like what I got here. I have this big video that's like 4 hours long of my last Slime Rancher playthrough before Slime Rancher 2. Seems like that one's been getting a lot of attention, so if you feel like watching something that'll help me out a lot, that one would probably help me out the most. So yeah, most importantly though, y'all, above all that stuff, don't you worry about all that stuff before you do this. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I have been Price, and I will see y'all next time.